Hello viewers, I hope you are fine and taking good care of yourself. So we'll begin with our next lesson of grade 9, that is lesson number 2 from unit 3 book 2, Emergence of Bani and Qawasim and the beginning of the colonial period. So here we have the learning outcomes. To explore the impact of the age of exploration and the arrival of the Portuguese, to understand the resistance which was put up by the local Arab people to the occupation and the violence of the Portuguese period, to understand the chronology and the historical period of the empire rivalry in the Indian Ocean and the Arabian Gulf regions. Next, to examine the U.A.E's largest tribal groupings and their influence on the present-day government. And last but not the least, to explain the founding of Abu Dhabi. This is the warm-up question from the textbook. You can go through. Before I proceed further, just a humble request to please subscribe to Learn SST. So let us see the Portuguese in the Arabian Gulf and the Indian Ocean. I have put up a map over here which will give you a clear view about the sea route which was taken and discovered rather by none other but the Portuguese sailor Vasco da Gama. As the land route between Europe and Asia was closed down, Constantinople was taken away by the Ottoman Turks from the Byzantine Empire in 1453. So the European merchants felt a need to find a sea route to the region of Indian Ocean because they wanted to carry on the trading activities if the land route was closed. So they started searching for the sea route. So here you can find the map in which it gives us a clear view about how Vasco da Gama had traveled from the European region of Portugal. Then he came into the continent of Africa, and then from the southernmost tip of South Africa he took a turn, and then finally he reached the region of India, and that is in the region of Calicut in India. So in 1498, the Portuguese rounded the Cape of Good Hope in South Africa and arrived at the coast of southern India. In 1507, the Portuguese, led by Alfonso de Albuquerque, launched a series of naval and land attacks along the Arabian Gulf and Indian Ocean region. Now, why did they do so? Obviously, because they had the greed of taking over the region for commercial purpose. So this resulted in violence and it completely disturbed the peaceful and the prosperous Indian Ocean, and in the Indian Ocean the trading system which was going on between the Arabian countries and the Indian traders, all that got disrupted, and including U.A.E. So after a series of violent attacks on the coastal areas of Oman and the town of Horfakan here in the U.A.E., the Portuguese built forts to maintain their occupation of the coast. So they built sea forts, and the reason was only to have complete domination over the region so that they can carry out the commercial or the trading activities. Resistance to this occupation by the local people continued for the next 150 years. Resistance means they put up a fight and they had put up a struggle for the liberation. By 1650, the Omani town of Muscat was retaken from the Portuguese. Now let us see the resistance and the revival of Qawasim, Baniyas and other towns. The ruling dynasty of Zulfar was the Qawasim of Ras Al Khaimah. So this is what we have to remember over here. So the ruling dynasty during that time in the region of Ras Al Khaimah or Zulfar rather was the Qawasim, to whom one paid a tax in order to engage in commerce or commercial activities, including the local agriculture fields of dates. So obviously, the ruler is always being paid by the subjects, by the commoners, and they have to pay the tax. So they were paying the tax for their livelihood. So those who were engaged in commerce or in commercial activities were supposed to pay the tax, including the farmers who were busy on the agriculture fields and they were doing the cultivation of the dates. The pearl diving and trade was also lucrative. Lucrative means it was in prosperity, or it was the main occupation, one of the main occupation of the people during that time. Ships from Ras Al Khaimah returned yearly with approximately 80,000 rupees from selling the dates. So the dates of this particular region of Ras Al Khaimah was so much in demand that it fetched them a good price of 80,000 rupees. A tenth of this amount went to their sheikhs as a local tax or customs fees. So tenth of this part could be, I suppose, 8,000, somewhere around 8,000. So that was supposed to be paid in form of taxation or the custom fees to the local sheikhs. By the late 18th century, the Qawasin had a fleet. Fleet is a group of large ships that frequented, that kept on moving or shuttling on the ports of India, Yemen, Sindh, which is in Pakistan, Cochin in India, and Basra. Each sailor's share or pay on this voyage varied. So for the trip to India, it was 50 to 80 rupees. Now it has no value. If 50 and 80 rupees, you hardly get a, just get a ice cream or a good quality of this chocolate. And then if one took the trip to Yemen, it was 70 rupees. Then to Africa, it was hardly 40 rupees. To Sindh or to Cochin, it fetched only 25 to 30 rupees. And finally, back to Muscat, 12 rupees. So this was the payment which was given to the sailors for their expedition or for their voyages. The Qawasim sailors did not earn any money from their trips to Basra because their ships were loading up both fresh and dried dates, which they then sold to the other ports. So they did not get any money out of loading of the dates from the region of Basra. Now let us see the Dutch in the Gulf region. So it was not only the Portuguese that came into the region, but also the Dutch had tried their hands over there. So during the Dutch period of trading in the Gulf to about say 1760, the Arabian Gulf had favoring conditions for good trading. So the Arabian Gulf region was mainly based on the merchants and the shipping to the trade long distances across the Indian Ocean. So all that activity was going on. It was a hub for such kind of, sea trading. From the Russian historian Lionovich's study of the Dutch period, records, we find evidence, we find proofs of a substantial, so we find a good proof about the trading profit along the southern Arabian Gulf coast. So that fetched them a good price, gave them good returns. So that's the reason you find the Dutch also, showing their interest in this particular region. Arab trade ships of various size made regular voyages, and they took the voyages between Basra, Bahrain, Ras Al Khaimah, Muscat, and to the Indian trade ports of Cochin. So the Cochin is the region in India which is in the southern region. So you find a lot of trading and commercial activities taking place. So even the Dutch felt that even they should try their hands over here. From the Dutch residency documents in Basra, we have limited but insightful evidence of relative rates of profits and amounts paid distributed to ordinary seamen on these voyages. The end of the Dutch period in 1960s also seemed to be a high watermark for Arabian commercial seamen from 1780s onwards increased rivalry which began, and it started growing and taking a very bad shape, more aggression by the British presence and internal developments in Arabia that responded to these changed conditions. So it was not only the Dutch, but after the Dutch, after the period got over in 1960s, you'll find that lot of developments and rivalry and all that aggression taking place due to the British presence. British, I suppose, had tried their luck everywhere and they were successful. At one time, people used to say that the sun never set in the British Empire because they had so many regions under their control, not only in Africa or in Asia, but also in Europe. Now, over here we have Sheikh Rahma bin Matar al Qasimi. So, during the rule of Sheikh Rahma bin Matar al Qasimi, who ruled from 1780 to 1760, the coastal town around Ras Al Khaimah grew wealthy from its development of shipping, pearling, and trade with other Gulf towns. That is the Oman coast, in the East Africa, and the region of India. So you have this particular region becoming quite prosperous because of the shipping activities and because of the pearl. You might be aware of this pearl diving. It's a very, very traditional occupation of the people. And then obviously many products which were imported and exported in this region, in and out of the Gulf region. British arrival interference in the Gulf. Let us see that. After 1763, the British increased their presence in the Gulf and became the most powerful for empower after the withdrawal of the Dutch from the Gulf region in 1765. So slowly and steadily you have the retreating of the Dutch and you have the entry of these people, that is the Britishers. The British used their sea power to attack and limit local shipping and development along the coast. The Britishers are actually said to be good seafarers. So, and they had a very powerful navy during that time. So obviously they started attacking and counter-attacking and so on. They wrongly accused. So that was the worst thing which they could do. And what they had done, they were wrongly accusing the Qawasim sailors and ships of being pirates. That means the sea dacoits. So they were called as sea dacoits who were looting the ships which were on trade voyages in 1809, and again in 1819 they attacked and bombed port towers along the southern Gulf, including Ras Al Khaimah. The images here were drawn by a British artist after the attack on Ras Al Khaimah. So you can see in your textbook also, you will get a clear view about how much destruction was caused by wrongly accusing the Qawasin sailors and by bombing the region by the Britishers in this region of Ras Al Khaimah. Now let us see the myth of Arab piracy. One of the myths, or you can say the false ideas, which were spread by the British after their arrival in the 18th century, late 18th century. So they have accurately mentioned after 1760. So it was 1765. Was that the Qawasin sailors and the fleets of ships were engaged in acts of piracy by attacking British and other shipping in the Gulf. In his book on this subject, you have this person, that is Sheikh Dr. Sultan Al Qasimi, and the ruler of Sharjah, proved that this was a false story made by the British without substantial evidence. In fact, the Qawasin shipping up till say about 1809 was prosperous and it was growing its trade across the region in peaceful ways. So this was a very bad you can say, a blame which was put, or blot which was put on the Qawasim sailors by the Britishers. Now let us move on to Al Nahyan and the Baniyas, which moved to the region of Abu Dhabi. So in 1761, the Baniyas tribe, under the leadership of Sheikh Diab of the Al Nahyan family, relocated and settled in the island and the coastal area of Abu Dhabi. The Portuguese Empire and the Arabian Seas, 1500 to 1620. So, how did they flourish themselves and expanded their empire? You get a clear view in this particular slide. The Ottoman Empire dominated the Mediterranean and the large parts of Western Asia since their conquest of Constantinople in 1452. 1453. Inspired by the Ottomans, the Europeans began exploring the Atlantic Ocean and down the coast of Africa. After the Americas were discovered in 1490s, so this was accidentally discovered. Columbus wanted to discover the sea route to India, but then he accidentally landed in the region of America, discovered altogether a new continent, and when he looked at the people, he called them also as Indians. But slowly and steadily, it was Amerigo Vespucci, and when he reached into the region of America, he felt that no, it's not India, but it is actually totally a new continent which was discovered by Columbus. So it is after Amerigo Vespucci you get the name derived from his surname for America. So over here, these Europeans got very much motivated or inspired by these Ottomans, and they started searching for a sea route to India. Now over here, they started even expanding themselves through maritime empires and colonies. So they started making the new lands um, politically under their control, and they made them those colonies. Tragic consequences. So the worst results of the colonization were that the European diseases devastated the indigenous populations of North and South America, who had no immunity to them, and hundreds of thousands of people from the western coast of Africa were captured and forced into slavery to work on the plantations in the New World. So the New World was America, and how you have these African men, and they were treated as slaves. They were bought as slaves from Africa, and they were put into this hard laborious task on the plantations on this region of America. So these Europeans, they brought with them in this newly founded region of America the diseases which they had, and the worst part was that obviously the people were not like, they were new to these diseases and they had not developed immunity. So obviously they fell victim to these diseases. And the next thing is in 1488, a Portuguese sailor, Dias, managed to sail around the southern tip of Africa, but he only went a short distance further. So he came right up till the region that is the southernmost tip, that is the Cape of Good Hope. Till there he came, but then he did not move little more further towards his left east side, otherwise he would have discovered it. So the credit goes to Vasco da Gama. In 1497 he sailed from Lisbon in Portugal along the West African coast, and in December of the same year he rounded the southern edge of Africa, continuing on, and he crossed the Indian Ocean and reached a place near modern day Calicut, which is in Kerala in India. He became the first European sailor to complete a voyage, the sea journey between Western Europe and India. Although historical sources, according to that, he learned about the route from the Arab sailors. So actually the credit goes to the Arab sailors. The Portuguese began controlling areas of South Africa and the Arabian Gulf. Vasco da Gama's knowledge about how to sail across the Indian Ocean was still, however, very much limited, as it is evident in his decision to return to Kenya in August. Now, over here, they have given you the reason also why he just retreated, because this was the worst time to travel from east to west, as the winds were blowing in the opposite direction. So whenever you're moving with the winds, your sails are with the winds, then you travel faster and you save your fuel. But if you travel opposite to the winds, obviously the movement becomes very difficult. And in those days they did not have good facilities how we have in modern times. We have electric engines and all that, which helps the propellers which keep on moving and helps in the movement of the ships. Those were the things which were not there. So local sailors and navigators who understood the monsoon pattern, like Ibn Majid, would have known this, but he did not have. Vasco da Gama did not have that much of knowledge of sailing into the Indian Ocean. So the trip back to India took a terrible toll on his ships. Instead of 23 days, which he would have taken from Malindi to Calicut, it took him 132 days, almost 100 and say 9 days extra to sail in the opposite direction. So you can understand that how harmful it is when you do not follow the planetary winds and the trade winds, and you just take a voyage in ignorance. So this is what you end up with. Many of his sailors died from thirst and starvation, but most of his fleet made it back home to Portugal. Let us see the Portuguese and the U.A.E. Soon afterwards, the Portuguese explored and expanded their control into the Arabian Gulf. In 1507, the Portuguese naval commander Alfonso de Albuquerque attacked Sohar in Oman. He then turned his attention to the coastal cities of U.A.E that had become important trading centers. So this is what we have to remember over here, that in 1507, this particular naval commander Alfonso de Albuquerque, he attacked the region of Sohar, which is in Oman, and then afterwards he turned his attention towards UAE. And why did he turn his attention towards the coastal cities of UAE? Because they were important trading centers, or you can say they were the hubs for commercial activities. The people of Khor Fakkan on the east coast had been warned he was coming. That means this particular naval commander was coming. He was on his way and prepared for his attack. So although the people were well uh, mentally prepared and they were ready for it, however they could not withstand the cannon fire. So these Portuguese ships, from their ships only, they were using the cannons and they were firing from those cannons. After they landed, the Portuguese seized, they invaded the town after tough resistance from its inhabitants. That means the people of Khor Fakkan, they gave a tough resistance. It was not an easy piece of cake for the Portuguese to just enter into the city and take it over. So after a lot of struggle, they had to undergo, and then the region of Khor Fakkan came under their sway or under their control. When they left Khor Fakkan, next day they took with them the supplies, that is including the water, and then the worst part was that they burnt the city. Portuguese accounts, so the historical records over there, refer not only to their conquest, that how they invaded the region, but also provided detailed description of the major towns in the UAE at that time. So in De Albuquerque's chronicle means the accounts, the travel details which he had written. Khor Fakkan is said to have had good houses. It is very strong on the land side, and the reason of this is that it was more fearful of being attacked by land than by seas. So on the land side, they had built maybe a fortified walls, and they did not have fear of the seas, but they had the fear of the land attack. Many worthy merchants of Gujarat, India lived there. The town lies at the foot of the very high mountain, and on the land side it was very strong wall, that is a fortified wall, which is carried along to the sea. In the interiors are many estates with means huge big properties with good houses, lavish, and many orange trees, lemon trees, figs, palms, and all sorts of vegetables, and many water pools which they used for irrigation purposes. In the fields, they followed this practice of straw stubble, that is burning of the remains, that is the waste of the harvested grains, like it could be a rice, it could be wheat, it could be maize, or so on. As in Portugal, what they practice, so in that same manner it was done over here as in Portugal. And there are many maize fields, so there were lots and lots of maize fields or corn fields over there. He also mentions the plentiful horses that were kept in the stables in Khorfakkan. Hormuz and the Portuguese in the Arabian Gulf. With such wealthy town and with the profitable pearling industry, it is hardly surprising that the Portuguese wanted to control parts of the UAE. So there were such wealthy towns, and also the pearling industry was so profitable. So it is obviously, it's not surprising. Obviously they wanted to take over. The Portuguese wanted to have control over the UAE. The remainder, that is the remaining part of 1507, was spent in capturing the regions, that is the eastern coast of UAE, and then eventually Hormuz itself. It was not easy for the Portuguese to capture Hormuz. However, as their fleet, so it was not that easy cup of tea for them to just take over the region of Hormuz. As their fleet approached, the ships from the Zulfar in Ras Al Khaimah as well as Hormuz itself, they fired upon the Portuguese fleet. So they had large number of ships, and these Portuguese were heading towards the shores of Hormuz, but it was not easy for them to take over because they had to face a tough resistance from the Zulfar region as well as from Hormuz itself. Eventually Hormuz fell and the local ruler accepted Portuguese rule. Once Alfonso the Albuquerque returned to India, the kingdom of Hormuz, with support from the people on the east coast of UAE, they revolted against the invaders. So the invaders were the Portuguese. When this particular naval commander Alfonso, when he returned to India, they felt that this is the best time. Let us just revolt and take back the region of Hormuz. The Portuguese put the revolt down. They attempted to control parts of UAE more directly by establishing forts at Kalba, Diba, Bidia, and Khorfakkan. Others were built later at Zulfar and at Khasab in the Musandam Peninsula north of Ras Al Khaimah. That means it was built in the region of Oman, present day Oman. The descriptions of these Portuguese forts provide important information about the life at that time. So it was not only the conquest of the Portuguese that it highlights, but the description also highlights the life during those days, the trading activities, and how prosperous were the coastal towns of UAE. The map maker Pedro Barreto de Hisanje, I hope I am pronouncing his name correctly, writes that the water in Khorfakkan was said to be the best in all of Arabia. He also so we also come to know about the existence of large villages with mud brick buildings surrounded by date palm, then gardens and wells. The picture is one of a prosperous society. A very stunning description over here about this region. For most of the 16th and the early part of the 17th century, the Common Era or the Christian Era CE, the Portuguese claimed control over these coastal areas of UAE by virtue. That means they literally had a complete control over the kingdom of Hormuz. Now, it is not that the people did not. From time and again, they kept on revolting against the Portuguese. So, resistance against the Portuguese grew. The local people over there wanted to resist because they kept freedom above everything. So in 1619, a major revolt occurred in Zulfar in the region that is in Ras Al Khaimah. In 1622, Hormuz, controlled by the Portuguese, was attacked by the twin forces that is in alliance, the Persian and the British force. So they wanted to open the gates of trading so that they can start trading in the Gulf region. So they took the help of the Persians. So with these twin forces, you have the attack in this region of Hormuz, which was controlled by the Portuguese. After several months, so to be precise, after 10 weeks, almost 2.5 months, the the siege, that is the city which was under the control of the Portuguese, it was then under the control of these Persians and the Britishers. The British had first arrived in the Gulf a few decades, few 10 years. Decade is a 10-year, so few decades earlier they had arrived, as had the Dutch, but they followed the policy of just trading and moving away. So they never established any kind of presence in the Emirate region. So here we have a Dutch view of Bidya in Fujairah. So how did the Dutch people looked up upon this region of Bidya? Although the Dutch never established a presence in the area of U.A.E, they knew many of its towns as they continued to trade in the Gulf during the 17th century. In 1666, a Dutch ship, the name of the ship was the Mercat, sailed along the coast. It described the town of Bidya. So how does the description go on? So it goes like this. Libdia, that is what they used to call it, is a place which was for about say 200 houses, all built from the branches of the date palms. It is standing on a beach, and they have given a exact location of the region, that is latitude of 25 degrees and 5 minutes. It has behind the houses a beautiful valley, and where there was a great number of date palms, some fig trees, and several wells. One of them a pistol shot distance. That means just a stone throw from the beach. There is a very good and fresh water to be got. So one can get easily availability of very good and fresh water just a stone throw from the beach. In this valley, you can grow some melons, watermelons, and onions. Having lost control of Hormuz, the Portuguese reinforced their possessions on the U.A.E. east coast. So it was not that they were just happy to leave the region and go away, but they didn't wanted to just do away with this region. So however, the local resistance, it continued. The people of Dibba revolted against the foreign control. Then you have this particular Portuguese commander Ray responded by placing 50 Portuguese soldiers into the city. So by 1627, the locals had also revolted against these soldiers. Pietro della Valle, an Italian diplomat traveling at that time in the Gulf, wrote that the Arabs do not suffer to being subject to anyone and put freedom above all. So that is rightly said about the Arabs, that they don't like to be subjected under any kind of foreign rule. In Oman, the first leader of the Yariba dynasty, Nasir bin Murshid, began to retake Portuguese forts by first attacking Muscat. Around 1632, Zulfar was liberated. It got freedom when the garrisons of Hormuzzi and the Portuguese soldiers were defeated. So you have slowly and steadily the region of this Hormuz and how these Portuguese soldiers being defeated and how it was liberated. It won freedom in the year 1632. In 1643, Khorfakkan was liberated. So this region got freedom in 1643. These victories encouraged further resistance against the Portuguese. So obviously, after these two wins, the people felt that they felt like being quite motivated, and they felt that we can still proceed further with the resistance and move these Portuguese away from the region of U.A.E. Nasir bin Murshid successor, Sultan bin Saif, finally liberated other key ports from Portuguese control. So all these, why was it called as key ports? Because they were the trading ports and very prosperous ones, which the Portuguese were not ready to do away with. By 1650, Muscat was retaken and the Portuguese had lost every outpost on the U.A.E and the Oman coast. So by 1650, it was completely the doing away or the retreat of the Portuguese. The Portuguese did not disappear from the region, but their defeat meant that they were not longer controlling major trade routes and putting heavy taxes on shipping. This permitted the tribes of the Arabian Gulf to sail under their own flags. So the Portuguese were there, but then they had to pay heavy custom duties so that they can have their ships operating from the Gulf region to Portugal. The appearance of the British soldiers in the attack on Hormuz in 1621 marked the emergence, that is, the beginning, a new beginning of an entirely new European power. And that European power was Britain in the Arabian Gulf. The East India Company, which promoted English trade interest abroad, was weak at that time. East India Company was, I suppose, formed in the year 1600 in London, and it was hardly 20 years when we are talking about like 1621. So hardly 21 years when they were formed. So they were not that strong enough. If you see and if you look back into the history of India, I suppose for 90 years we had the rule of English East India Company in India, and for another 100 years later we had the rule of the British Crown in Parliament. So we can just cannot judge from the line over here that it was weak throughout. No, after a few years it had become quite strong enough to have control over the country of huge big country of India. It did not extend its power into the Arabian Gulf until later. Nevertheless, England was to have a lasting influence on the region until the formation of the U.A.E in 1971. So this was just the beginning. England did not leave for another, say, 3 centuries. So for 300 years they had their presence felt in this region of U.A.E. In the year 1971, U.A.E got liberated. This is the activity one, that is the concept check, and the activity two from the textbook. Please go through. Tribal origins of the modern U.A.E. The Qawasim and the Baniyas represent twin aspects of modern life in the U.A.E. The Baniyas were familiar with the interior of the country and had strong desert roots, while also being involved in the offshore pearl fisheries. So here we have the Qawasim and the Baniyas tribe. And these two tribes, they represent the twin aspect, means the twin features, the twin outlook of the modern life in UAE. Now with regards to Baniyas, they were familiar with the interiors of the country and they had very good desert routes. That means they knew everything of the interiors of this region. Also, they were good in this occupation of pearl diving. So they were involved in this pearl fisheries, wherein they fished out the pearl oysters, extracted the pearls from there, and then obviously after the process it was sold. Whereas the Qawasins were merchants and sailors who sailed the Arabian Gulf and Indian Ocean. So you have these two main tribes, and these are the three occupations which they followed. So the Qawasims were merchants and they were also good sailors. They shuttled between Arabian Gulf and Indian Ocean. The emergence, that is the development of these two groups, allied with the tribes of smaller coastal ports like Ajman and Al Queen, laid the foundation for UAE of today. So these were the two important tribes. Besides that, there were some smaller tribes also in these smaller coastal regions of Ajman and Al Queen, and all of them together formed what we have today's UAE. The pattern of government now began to become distinctively recognizable across the region, in towns and rural areas as well as in the desert and mountains. The leader of each community, that is the sheikh, ruled in consultation with the other members of his family and key individuals in the community. So what we follow today is almost the same pattern of administration which was followed in olden times. So they have picked up all those features of the governance from the past. In those days, it was that the rural areas as well as the desert areas and the towns were administered, and the pattern of governance was such that you had a sheikh, the leader of the community called as a sheikh, and he ruled in consultation with the other members. It could be the other members of his family and the key individuals they had in the community. Open meetings, rather like today's, how we have majlis, would have been held, and some key issues of those days were discussed. So even now in present times we have majlis, and the key issues whatever of the day were discussed. So it's been discussed. In times of war, whether it is with the neighbors or with any foreign powers, the sheikh would call upon his people to form a fighting force. So in modern times we have the standing army, and that standing army obviously was the army in which if there is any kind of aggression, external aggression or threat, then the army is sent, and the problem is dealt with. In early times it was the commoners, and they were the people who came forward and fought and defended their country or the emirate. It is evident both from the limited written records that exist and from the oral traditions passed down from one generation, say, to another, that this system of governance had close parallels to the system we see today. So it's almost the same pattern which we follow today, and whatever were the evidence which were available, say the written records which were quite limited, plus whatever was spoken about from one generation to another by word of mouth. So all that shows that whatever system of governance they have today is almost like what they had in the olden days. To succeed as rulers, the sheikh needed to consult with and maintain the support of the people. It's almost today also. The UAE today may be a fairly young country, say less than 50 years old, but its system of governance is very much older. All the ruling families of UAE can trace their origins at least to the 18th century. So today's rulers and their families have led the people of the Emirates for over 200 years. So you can find that whosoever is in the ruling administration is actually belonging to a royal family, and this royal family is ruling from the father to the son, then his son, and it went on like this. So it's a dynasty which they have formed, and since 200 years the sheikhs have been ruling. So let us see the Al Nahyan family. Sometime in the middle or late 17th century, today's ruling family, that is the Al Nahyan family, emerged as the chief of the Bani. So they were called as the chief, or they were the people who had led the Al Nahyan family, had were the rulers of this particular region of Bani Yas. The first known Al Nahyan Sheikh was called Fala from the Abu Fala section of the tribe. So his name was Fala, the first Al Nahyan Sheikh. He was called as Fala because he belonged to this particular tribe, Al Bufala. One of his four sons, Nahyan, then succeeded him. Then perhaps in the early 18th century, Nahyan's son, Isa, became the Baniyas Sheikh. From now on, the history of the Baniyas became clear. So you have the first Sheikh, and that is Fala, and then he had four sons. That is, one of them was Nahyan, who succeeded him, who took over the throne after, say, the death of Fala, Sheikh Fala. And then slowly and steadily you have the Nahyan family. Then his son, that is Isa, he became the Sheikh of Bani Yas. A few decades later, after Sheikh Diab had succeeded his father, that is Sheikh Isa, the Bani Yas moved to occupy the island of Abu Dhabi. The date that is commonly associated with this move is 1761. So it was the time when Sheikh Diab was the ruler. So they shifted from Bani Yas region to Abu Dhabi. A well-known story attributed this move to, say, hunters having followed a gazelle from the coast across a shallow inlet to a spring on the island of Abu Dhabi. So there was a shallow inlet of water, and from that shallow inlet of water they went into a spring region, and that spring region was found in none other place than in the island of Abu Dhabi. So the hunters, they followed this gazelle. I have put up a picture over here. And the tribesmen, when they returned to Liva and they told Sheikh Diab of their discovery, he then ordered a settlement to be built on this island. Why? Because obviously it might be the two reasons which they have mentioned over here. One is that it was close to the pearl banks, and second thing, there was easy availability of, say, water. So this story provides the origin for the name Abu Dhabi. So Abu means the father or the possession of, and the possession of what? Dhabi. Dhabi is a gazelle. So this was a very good move, you can say, or it was a very wise move, because as it has been written over here that it was close to the pearl banks. The Baniyas began to grow as an economic and maritime power. Maritime power is the naval power. It was also easily defended. Why it was easily defended? Because this particular island was separated from the mainland by a creek. A creek is a narrow inlet of water which divides the sea. Then the tower at the tower at Makta, restored by Sheikh Zayed in 1969, was used for this purpose. So there was a tower, and the tower was at this region of Makta, which we have to remember, and this was restored. It was brought into use by Sheikh Zayed in 1969 and was used for this purpose. The tower served to control the access to the island of Abu Dhabi. It marked the tribe's control over the island and their intentions to establish their seat of power. That means that now they have shifted their capital, their seat of power, from Diva to Abu Dhabi. In 1795, Sheikh Shekbat bin Diab succeeded his father as a ruler and moved his headquarters from Liva to Abu Dhabi. And Sheikh Shekbat established a fort on the island. So this particular fort was to become the first part of the building that today is known as Qasr al-Hussein. So Qasr al-Hussein plays a very important role in symbolizing their power, their holding in this particular region of Abu Dhabi. In a map from 1830s, the fort is very clearly indicated in the position in which it still stands today. The establishment of Abu Dhabi as a center of Al Nahyan power was critical to their success in the coming centuries. Yes, it played a very important role. Even now you have the Al Nahyan family ruling the region of Abu Dhabi. Qasr al-Hussein became became the center for community consultation and political discussion. So it was purely used, Qasr al Hussein was the center which was purely used for political purpose, that is discussion of all the political issues. Important decisions like the signing of the first oil concessions were made here. One of the first actions of Sheikh Bad was to establish a fort on the island. So this was a very good move which the Sheikh had done. This building became the first component. It became a very important feature of Qasr al Hussein, which is the center of Al Nahyan power. Now this is activity 3, very much from the textbook, you can go through. Sheikh Rehma bin Matar al-Qasimi. According to the Dutch report of 1756, Sheikh Rehma, who founded the Al-Qasimi dynasty, is at present the most powerful among the Huala rulers, having of his own people 400 well armed with firearms in Zur, which is in Ras Al Khaimah, which has a good harbor where the largest ships can find shelter. There are there may be about 60 vessels there, of which the most are large and well provided and navigate down to the Mocha, which is a port in Yemen. In this place itself, there is rather considerable trade as well as pearls, as of some merchandise, some more provisions which are to be carried into the desert region. So here you have the founder of Al Qasimi dynasty, and he was is said to be the most powerful of the Huwala rulers, and he has 400 well armed uh, military with firearms in this region of Ras Al Khaimah. And it's a very important port. Why? Because obviously the different kinds of provisions and merchandises, even pearls, are being carried, the trading has been carried down in this particular region, and it is easily navigable. Why? Because it is connected to this region of Mocha, which is again a flourishing port in the region of Yemen. And now let us see the Al-Qawasim. To the north of the country, the Qawasim, who today are the rulers of Sharjah and Ras Al Khaimah, began to grow in the middle of the 17th century, when one of them was involved in a war between Oman and Persia. So over here you have Sharjah and the rulers of Sharjah and Ras Al Khaimah, and slowly and steadily how they came into this region, that is the middle of the 17th century. You come to know that they are emerging as being powerful between this region of Oman and Persia. So in 1718, Sheikh Rehma bin Matar, who was the leader and formed alliance friendship with Oman in another war with Persia. By around say 1720, he was being called the Emir. Emir means the Sheikh, and he began to establish his own independent state. Dutch writers of that time note that he was one of the wealthiest merchants and ship owners in the Arabian Gulf. He died around say 1760 and was succeeded by his brother Sheikh Rashid. By this time, the Qawasin, they ruled much of the northern areas of U.A.E. They expanded their influence to include parts of eastern coast of U.A.E., including the important ports like Orfakan and Dibba. They also controlled several important islands in the Arabian Gulf region, including the Greater and the Lesser Thunb, Abu Musa, and Siri, as well as a parts of Qasim Island. So these are the important names which we have to remember. They also ruled in the areas of the southern Iranian coastline, Bandar Linge, where they retained the control until the late in the 19th century. Their ships sailed the ships from Basra, that is from Iraq, to India and southward to East Africa. So here you have the emergence of Qawasin. Those were the rulers, and even today they are the rulers of Sharjah and Ras Al Khaimah. And how in the 17th century they had emerged being successful, and how an independent state which was formed with the bravery and with the alliance with Oman, that is in 1718 by Sheikh Rahma bin Matar, and in 1760 however he expired, and after that he was succeeded by his brother Sheikh Rashid. And slowly and steadily how the expansion took place in the eastern coast of UAE is seen in this particular slide, wherein you have the important four ports of Khorfakan and Diba being included in the expansion process. Also, you will find over here that the several important islands and how they were controlled, including the names which are given over here of Abu Musa, Siri, Greater and Lesser Thun, and even the Qism Island. So, slowly and steadily, how the regions of Bandarlinga and all that was retained over here. Then the ships which were sailing in the seas from Basra, that is Iraq, into the region of India, and then sailing southwards to East Africa. So by this we can understand that how flourishing was the trading routes and the sea routes, and how important was the Arabian Gulf during those days as it is now today also. This is activity 4 again from the textbook. Please go through. Here comes activity 5 again from the book. You can see the answer. You can add some more points of your own. This is activity 6 from the textbook. Please go through. You have activity 7. This is what I have learned from the lesson which I was preparing for my viewers. I have taken more or less a few things from the learning outcomes, and I have reframed a little bit here and there, because that is only the learning outcome or the objectives of the lesson. So this is what I have learned, so I put them up. You can add a few more points of your own. So here I come to the end of my video. Thank you so much for watching my channel Learn SST. Please do like, share and subscribe. If you have any queries regarding the lesson or any other lesson of UAE, then please feel free to send me the comments in the comment box, and I will see to it that I sort out your queries. And please be generous enough to subscribe to my channel, and by word of mouth please spread the work which I am doing towards U.A.E SST to all your friends and to your classmates, so that they get benefited by my videos. See you next time with my new video. Till then, take very good care of yourself. Bye bye.